All right, welcome everybody to the Illuminated Mind podcast with me, Matthew Brownstein, founder and executive director of the Institute of Interpersonal Hypnotherapy. And I'm really pleased to be here now with graduate Sam Choura. Sam, you graduated the school back in what, 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. So you were in Gainesville, one of our first classes. You've gone on to get your degree in mental health counseling, and that's part of why we're here to talk about integrating hypnotherapy with licensed mental health counseling, but just to go deep into the topic. So thanks for being here, first of all.
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for matching me. This was totally uncoordinated, but it speaks to the energy and the connection that remains.
Right on. Beautiful. And on that notion, just for fun, I'm just going to show screenshots of your screen share of your graduating class. So this is both of us when we were, what, 15 years younger. Yeah, really wonderful, relatively small group, but that was, yeah, in the early days of the school. And then there's you getting your diplomas. So
There it
really happy
is.
to be able to share that. Awesome. So yeah, it's great to be here with you. So tell us about yourself and your background so people can get to know who you are.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, maybe starting most recently. So, right now I'm in Florida. So, right now I work in a telehealth company working in addictions, but I also work at a very holistic integrative center that celebrates hypnotherapy. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure we'll get more into it.
Mm-hmm.
And really celebrates sort of the whole variety of holistic methods and treatment of the individual. So, I've been here in Florida for the last, let's say, 4.5, almost 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I originally grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Always wanted to do some kind of healing profession. Originally, it was going to be more tailored to exercise science and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I shifted as soon as I had one psychology course in college. I shifted right to it's got to be mental health, it's got to be healing the mind. And my program was pretty unique at Duquesne. It was very existential based. Um, and it really kind of inspired more creative thought than your sort of traditional CBT ABCs of therapy. So we'll talk more about my motivations for hypnotherapy, but obviously part of that was a huge, if not one of the most significant moments and shifts in my life was going to the school. And I did end up getting my master's degree, as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
and been working in the realms of addiction, mental health ever since. But hypnotherapy, I still define as my therapeutic identity.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I appreciate hearing an approach that goes more into an existential, deeper than just the traditional uh, fundamentals of mental health.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. When you went through the school, we were called Florida Institute of Hypnotherapy. Then I had my own revelations through the years about this is so much deeper and bigger than just Florida. So we started calling it the Institute of Interpersonal Hypnotherapy. But what drew you to the school way back in 2010?
So I was right after I graduated. I graduated a semester late. It was December 2009, and I went and worked at this place I was interning, kind of just a, I dare I say I was sort of a glorified babysitter. But it was sort of in the realm of counseling, but I wasn't doing much to really impact the lives of others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'm just honestly bored for hours out of the day, and I'm just researching different things. I mean, I always had the intention of, moving towards graduate school, but I really wanted an excuse to live in Florida for a year. I didn't know if I could commit to like a 3-year program.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, I think you even mentioned this in our training, like somehow people just stumble on this website, like it just sort of spontaneously erupts in their space. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how I landed on it because I don't think I was specifically like hypnotherapy in Florida, but I was sort of just looking at the whole gamut of holistic healing. And it was specifically your outlines on past life regression therapy. I My cousin, who ironically is now like big in AI and not at all sort of humanistic
Mm-hmm.
or psychology based, but he had introduced me to a book called Many Lives, Many Masters, and that book had inspired me. And it was the past life regression that really clicked when I was
Mm-hmm.
reading about your website. And I was like, this is perfect. 9 months in person, Gainesville, cool area. My friend was moving there for his grad program.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, this is all just aligning perfectly. And reached out and did our interview, and the rest is history.
Yeah, for sure. I remember back in the days, it was such like precious dear, like just such heart-centered because we're in person. We weren't doing distance learning, and
Mm.
it's just great to have people come in. You get to hug them every time they walk into the classroom, and yeah, and then sharing the deeper spiritual themes. I'm glad to hear that's part of what brought you here and what influences your practice now. And then you actually repeated our training, which we allow graduates to do at no charge. And I was so pleased. I was like, hey, Sam's back in the loop. And so through 2025, I guess 2024 through 2025, you were actually repeating the training. What motivated you to do that?
Well, yeah, and I actually, the last one's coming up, believe it or not, in I think 2 weeks. So
Uh-huh.
that will sort of finalize the module five, which I'm super excited about to see what new things have been, inserted into that field, and
Hmm.
can always look to refine like the spirituality, past life regression work. So yeah, what motivated me, I mean, I when I moved to Tampa and I realized your at least sort of published or centralized location was Tampa.
Hmm.
I was like, this seems a bit. Actually, you know what? I'll mention even more wildly is we were actually in Alexandria together and
Right.
had tried briefly and tried to connect then. So I
Right.
was like,
Right.
I don't know if Matthew's following me or I'm following him or what's happening
Right.
here. But
Wearing the same clothing, right?
yeah, but then I end up in Tampa and I was like, I gotta just see kind of what's happening in the Florida, well, I guess Institute of Interpersonal Hypnotherapy world.
Hmm.
And you and I chatted. You had shared some like really powerful, like, long-term goals and visions with me, which were inspiring. But you mentioned, hey, just, if you want to really get reconnected, just start with the training. Then we can talk about whether it's teaching or, or guiding or
Hmm.
whatever. So I was like, that's actually amazing. Didn't know it was, a free resource I was allowed to pursue, which I just think is extraordinary. And yeah, we started in September.
Hmm.
We got a really cool cohort. It's just the four of us.
Hmm.
And, as much as I can offer my unique perspective, I'm learning just as much as I'm teaching in that space.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's how we best learn, right? Is through
Yeah,
teaching.
right. That's true.
Yeah. And just kind of a personal question. I don't know if anybody listening would care, but what was the difference between back then, what you experienced when we're 100% in-house with no distance learning, and now where we have at least 70% distance learning? I know you're doing 30% of the practicum in an in-person location, but have you seen a difference between the education when you're back then and now?
So, are you sure you want me to answer? I've always used the original model that I was privileged to have back in 2010
Yeah.
as, and I might be able to talk about grad school at some point, but
Hmm.
I always used your model as like how I thought was the perfect way to learn because even though it was really demanding, right? I would
Hmm.
work 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, Friday evening,
Wow.
Saturday all day, Sunday all day.
Right.
So there was not much time for a social life, but
Hmm.
I thought it was the best way to learn because you would do 1 week of that kind of didactic instruction, so
Hmm.
we'd absorb the information. Next week, essentially, you'd practice it. And I was when I was in my grad school, I was slightly discouraged at like it's so much didactic learning and just education. I'm like, when are we going to put these things into practice? Like that's
Hmm.
how the best way to learn. So I'm of course biased towards having you in person. I know that that's impossible when you're expanding nationally, but um, that to me, there's just no comparable
Hmm.
experience to
Hmm.
week in week out learning and practicing on each other. I thought because even now, like I said, nothing's really kept me as grounded to my therapeutic identity as what I learned in those 9 months.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, those days were beautiful. The early days of, 10 people in a physical
Yeah.
classroom. Yeah, it's grown so much and we've expanded with technology. But yeah, I'm glad you've experienced both sides of it. Awesome. So tell us about why you took a deeper dive in getting your master's. I heard you alluding to you had training in that before, so I don't know when it was before or after when you got your degree, but my understanding is after you graduated, you went on to become a licensed mental health counselor. Is that order correct? And then most importantly, why did you go on to get licensed?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the order, so that when I say training, I guess I got exposure with undergrad in psychology.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I initially got onboarded into it. And then, Florida Institute was basically, essentially a year commitment.
Mhm.
I had always actually planned to do a graduate program, even going down to, so it was already on sort of the trajectory, but believe it, I don't, I probably had mentioned this, but if not, what's really cool and probably inspiring to others is I had planned to do, I think now everyone does the five, which I think is important, but you originally kind of allowed just the first three and
Mhm.
you could call it quits. So that was my original plan, that it would end in December and then I'd come back to Pittsburgh in January. So September to January, or sorry, September to December, and I'd get the first three modules and then start my grad program. So it was always on the itinerary, but I was so inspired by the work. I had driven home from Gainesville to Pittsburgh and was doing the interview and just it didn't quite feel right. I was like, I need to see the rest of this program through. I'm just not ready for the graduate program. So I said, push this to the fall. I'll start then. But I'm heading back down to Florida to get and so glad I did. The
Mhm.
clinical hypnotherapy, the 400 hour, and then the 500 hour, of course, the past life, which was my original inspiration anyway.
Yeah, right.
Um, in terms of the license question, to me, I love, and I don't, everyone can have their own perspective on this. I just love to democratize access to this as much as possible.
Mhm.
So if I can provide the same, you know, hypnotherapy instruction along with, different methods I might have learned in grad school, um, but I can get insurance to pay for it,
Yeah.
then that's all time.
Mhm.
I I think it's totally appropriate, to have private paid clients, of course. And I think you even talk about, there are certain advantages to it.
Mhm.
But for me, it was always just like, how do I make sure I
Yeah.
get insurance to cover this so people really can utilize it as much as possible? And then, of course, people who don't even have the resources can utilize it. So
Mhm.
honestly, that was to get the license. I didn't need it to like validate my
Yeah.
identity. It was really just to allow more access in that way.
Yeah, it helps more people to be able to work with you
Yeah.
and let someone else pay for it. And of course, there's
Yeah.
benefits if people pay out of pocket themselves. But a big part of it was, yeah, just helping more people to have access, which is beautiful. What was the difference between, I know you've alluded to a unit, the training you went through for your master's was a bit more maybe holistic or open-minded, existential focused. But what's the difference between when somebody goes through a traditional university licensed mental health counseling track as opposed to hypnotherapy? Did you find there was like a deeper spirituality in one or the other? Did you have more freedom of thought in one or the other? Um,
Yeah, so what I've seen is there are a handful of graduate programs that I do think can kind of be a close analog to the hypnotherapy program. There's Naropa University
mhm,
in Colorado, Pacifica Graduate Institute, which my cousin just graduated from, very
mhm,
sort of Jungian based, but very kind of creative, out of the box thinking. Um, but generally speaking, what I found the most limiting was just this idea that you're sitting in a classroom, all you're doing, you're learning, and
mhm,
then you're writing a paper on it, then you're passing a test on it.
mhm,
And it wasn't until 4 or 5 semesters in that we finally started practicing and doing the experiential work. Now,
mhm,
eventually with the internships, it does help cultivate a therapeutic identity, but that to me would be one of the biggest limitations, just in the
mhm,
fact that um, I think, as I mentioned, it's great to just get started, pretty much at the onset to just learn how this whole process works. And of course, they have to follow kind of very kind of traditional set of guidelines. And
mhm,
what I love perhaps most of all, and I'm sure we'll get into this as well, was the creative and also spiritual lens that your hypnotherapy program offered, because it really helped me kind of expand my scope and understanding, this doesn't have to be for everyone, but it certainly helps me kind of formulate a perspective that I think is
mhm.
ends up being much more inclusive and inviting.
No, it's beautiful. I appreciate hearing that, inclusive and inviting. So, as far as techniques, when you went through our school and you went through your master's degree, and you said you're very rooted in hypnotherapy. I think you said it's like the foundation of what you do. Does that have to do with like a philosophical, spiritual approach, or are there just basic techniques that you basically maybe didn't learn in a university setting?
It's actually probably a combination. So I'll start with a much more um, structured way of how I define my identity that really, is rooted in, what I learned at the hypnotherapy program. One is, and I still use it. I don't think I use the exact words you use, but I later come to find out this has its similarities with CBT, but one of
Mhm.
your basic philosophies, right? Forgive me if I'm paraphrasing. Past events contribute to negative core beliefs,
Yeah,
which contribute to difficult emotions, which then contribute to our symptoms and behaviors.
you got it.
As just a simple premise, but such a foundational premise, it's like, okay, so now I know what we're doing here. We
Right.
can look at emotional management, we can look at behavior change, but
Hmm.
really we're trying to examine those core beliefs and
Hmm.
then also really get to the root cause, which are the past events. And I love the term past events too, because a lot of people, what I found in the mental health world, don't love the word trauma. They think it's disempowering or it can be victimizing. For many people, it can be validating.
Hmm.
But past events again is much more inclusive language of saying we all struggle with different past events. We don't have to
Hmm.
label it as anything in particular, but no one's made it through life without events that haven't impacted them in a significant way.
Hmm.
So that is a foundational philosophy. Also, just the structure of I can fill in different plots and gaps if I need to, but I love the structure of if I don't have a plan or if
Hmm.
I'm struggling with a plan, I can always fall back on, okay, we can do a hypnotic programming session,
Hmm.
session one. We can begin either inner child, visualization or parts work in session two, and then we can move to regression therapy, session three or four. So of course I love to just sometimes just follow the mood of the session, right? And just
Hmm.
kind of be a here and now present moment therapist.
Hmm.
But I feel much more confident, secure knowing if this doesn't go anywhere,
Hmm.
then I can always rely on these techniques to help guide the structure
Nice.
of a 4 to 6 session protocol.
Yeah, beautiful. So I hear there's tools you clearly get from us. I tell you a story that's in my mind as you're speaking. When I was in my private practice, maybe 5 years in, a licensed social worker came to me for sessions, and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me with something. Would you like to just do an exchange?" So we did. I helped her for sure. Then I was in her office talking about my issue, and after talking for about a half hour, I said, "Okay, well, what are you going to do to help me with this?" And she goes, well, we're just going to talk. We're just going to be with it. And so I just kept talking, being with it. And then after like
Yeah.
10 more minutes, I said, but what are you going to do to actually help me with this? If you were in my office, I would do this, and this with this issue.
Mm,
She said, well, I'm not trained in that. I'm like, okay, well, let's just keep talking. And then after talking for a bit longer, well, I would say it was the first time. I'm like, I would have done this. When I said again, okay, well, let's keep talking. And I'm like, but what are you going to do to help me? I said, I would do
yes.
this, and this. She goes, but I'm not trained in those modalities. And Matthew, it hurt the first time you said it. I'm like, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm just asking for help, and you don't have the tools to help me. And that's not overgeneralized across the board. I'm sure there's great therapists out there of skill sets. That one woman, and a lot of honestly people who have been in the mental health fields have come into our school and they said, I just feel disempowered. I don't actually know what to do with certain issues. And I found
Sure.
hypnotherapy offers a toolkit that maybe isn't taught in traditional settings. I don't know. This has always been my path, but that's why I'm really interested for you to expand a little bit more about. What would you do if you only had your master's degree license training as opposed to the techniques you have through our school?
Sure. So I can share, that I always defined my identity through those techniques, through that vision.
Hmm.
Until I stumbled upon one particular methodology that I found also helped equip me with now I can kind of toggle between both. And honestly, even these methods and this mentality still fit into the hypnotherapy model. So they're not in contrast, but sometimes I might just live more in this world. And the model, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. So, in essence, it's two features. One is mindfulness training, we'll say in a nutshell. So, here's a list of skills on how to build, a mindful awareness of your thoughts, emotions, sensations. Again, things that still were sort of infused in your program here and there.
Hmm.
Um, but the other big piece was, you could say, sort of the existential spin of acceptance and commitment therapy, which is really shifting dialogue and conversation around values-based living, is what they call it. Shifting your focus away from, I want to feel good, do I want to live a meaningful life?
Hmm.
So since, what I had learned and what really was my foundation, that was the closest sort of um, paradigm that I was able to kind of infuse in my approach.
Hmm.
But believe, in terms of the techniques shared in your program, I've found, the different methodologies in which there's an essence of it, but it's never done with such rigor, with such comprehension. So it's like, yes, IFS is a model, parts therapy model. I think they get too caught up, stuck with identifying firefighters and managers and exiles. It's like this is so much divorced from what can we do right now, which is what you said, which is like, okay, how are you going to help me right now? What can we do to create immediate change?
Hmm.
Even getting trained in EMDR, I was a little disillusioned. I'm like, I still kind of prefer, the eye movement therapy. It's much more
Hmm.
direct. Let's get right to it. And let's also utilize the hypnotic power to help, inspire and influence change. And then, like I said, even CBT can kind of tiptoe into the negative core beliefs and reframing them.
Uh-huh.
But I just found that the model you provided sort of just gave you the heavy artillery to create immediate change, which there are some clients that I don't think they're ready for that. And that's where the therapy comes in handy, where it's like sometimes we do have to sit together for 5 to 7 sessions to
Right.
build rapport and just be with,
Hmm.
especially if they're highly dysregulated. But generally speaking, I get people who are ready to go, which is probably most of the people that come into a hypnotherapist's office.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think that it's still fits in as my, base model, but I have found other modalities that don't conflict with it, but fit into its model as well.
Hmm. It's beautiful. And I like hearing that your training goes into mindfulness and present moment and acceptance. These to me align with just deep spiritual values. And a lot of what I've found, not necessarily with the training you went through for your master's, but I've found a lot of master's degree practitioners, people come in who LMHCs and LMFTs and social workers and all that. The spirituality wasn't part of their education. And so
Hmm.
I'd love to just hear your thoughts about the importance, not just of past life regression, but terms that are dear to me, like self-realization,
Hmm.
enlightenment. I know when I was in college as a religion and philosophy major, of course I thought about going into psychology. Yet at the time anyway, there was no spirituality in there. I can't dedicate my life to sitting there talking to someone and being limited to use the word God or to not be able to talk to them about what does enlightenment mean to you? What does self-realization mean to you? Like, what are we moving towards? Are we moving towards
Hmm.
true meaning or are you just helping you to resolve an issue? So how
Yes.
important has it been for you to be able to bring spirituality into the work?
For the most part, it always finds its way in, whether it's sort of like a force that's guided like beyond me is, and even that mindset is this very spiritually based mindset, is this idea of just kind of being the vessel of healing, not being the master or the expert,
Hmm.
but being the conduit. So it always, people, so I run, like I mentioned, a lot of addiction therapy groups. Now, 12 step can kind of again tiptoe into spirituality,
Hmm.
but people are often really drawn to the groups because they're like, oh, we're not just talking about I shouldn't drink. We're talking about how do we define our life in this world? Like, how do we discover a deeper sense of meaning and purpose?
Hmm.
There are some models that are getting there. Like I said, acceptance commitment therapy sort of tried to formulate Buddhism in a way that was more digestible. Like, here's some
Hmm.
skills that kind of get you into the place of,
Yeah.
they would never use the word enlightenment, but they use, self as context as a terminology to describe that observer standpoint,
Mhm.
the witness,
Yeah.
and a lot of the work you do in the opening the heart.
Mm.
So there are some models tiptoeing there. It didn't get addressed much in my grad program.
Mhm.
It is crucial to me. It is the most inspiring work I do.
Mhm.
I absolutely do not come with an agenda of like, here's what you need to believe or here's the right way of thinking. But when people are looking, it's like, well, here's another way of looking at things, especially if they've been disillusioned. I
Mhm.
can introduce them into, we'll say, oneness as a very broad concept.
Uh-huh.
Um, that a lot of people suddenly find a sense of peace and solace within.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm glad you have that with what you're doing. I guess one of my books, my newest book is called Facilitating Enlightenment. And I wrote that largely because I was watching facilitators working with a problem and trying to get you out of the problem. But it's like, what are we moving towards? And I found in the deep spiritual traditions, it's not a mystery about how to be free of suffering. Buddha figured that out 2,500 years ago. Christ had some good contributions to the cause. Right? The great masters through all the spiritual traditions basically said there is a way to be free of pain and suffering. And yet I wasn't finding traditional therapy was bringing people there. And I found with hypnotherapy, we had the ability to go there. So I'm honored to know you're a graduate who is bringing spirituality, acceptance, mindfulness, oneness into the work. It's beautiful. Can you tell us about a case history, something that might pop into your mind about someone that you've been able to really help with what you do?
So it would, there's a lot of examples that come to mind.
Mhm.
I want to sort of honor the sacredness of those relationships because I didn't really get any pre-auth in regards to sharing, even if,
Mhm.
of course I would stray away from personal health information, but even still, knowing that this is going to be a podcast, I wouldn't want to put anything that someone hasn't authorized.
Yeah.
But I am reminded that
Mhm.
when I was at a place, it was called Clarity Way at the time.
Mhm.
Um, by the way, the only place ever that recruited for a therapist that was doing hypnosis. So it was my first job
Mhm.
outside of grad school. I mean, talk about like the synchronicity of
Yeah,
life.
nice.
So that was the first place I ended up. But yes, I actually did, I was invited to not only talk about how hypnotherapy can help the world of addictions counseling,
Mhm.
but I also worked with someone in particular that I can actually pull up. And depending on the length of time we have, I can really share this presentation that I gave
Mm.
because we wrote a case study and this person, was volunteering and allowing me to utilize this.
Cool.
And
Do you need screen
so
share?
uh, well, I think I'll just because it is a lot. So I think even just summarizing,
Okay.
um, because I could probably do that on demand. So this is a client, female client that had identified, that obviously struggled with substance use and it was a residential program.
Mm.
Um, and, they knew kind of what they were getting into when they were working with me, as typically my focus was hypnosis, which was just so cool.
Mhm.
Um, so the first session, right away, able to build that rapport and utilize just the power of hypnotic programming,
Mm.
identify those, some negative beliefs, shift them, refocus them. Um, and what's amazing is that can be just in itself. I know we want to, oftentimes graduate to, the real big guns like regression therapy, breath
Yeah.
work. But sometimes, especially for people in early recovery,
Mhm.
just the fact that they can learn that their body doesn't need a substance to feel this good immediately,
Nice.
all of a sudden it's like, wait, and all I said was words, right? I was just saying words, and this person was able to respond to them and achieve a similar, if not even more enhanced level of peace than maybe their drug of choice would give them.
Uh-huh.
Certainly a more authentic one, right?
Mhm.
So just the mere experience of it was profound for them in discovering that. Um, the client was really focused on grief and loss, particularly with their father.
Mhm.
And so I think the next session, we didn't do hypnosis. We did a little bit of discussion on the process of grief and loss and how they make sense of it. So, kind of toggling back and forth. So we kind of skipped right over past life, or sorry, parts therapy.
Mhm.
But the third session, we really focused on regression. And the goal was to heal this past trauma that she'd experienced with the death of her father.
Mhm.
Um, and some of these techniques were specifically I learned from other practitioners in my program because what we started with, which I loved, which was taught in your program, was the focusing work.
Uh-huh.
So connecting to the grief and identifying, the emotional felt sense of it.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes, and I think I asked you this in a later in the trainings over the past year,
Mhm.
but sometimes I would use focusing as the induction. So
Mhm.
really, really deepening their connection with the felt sense. So they're kind of like completely immersed in it.
Mhm.
And then when the emotions so profound, we can use it right as an affect bridge.
Yeah.
And so we didn't even have to go through like the formalized trance ritual, which can really feel very organic, but still, in my experience, gets them right there.
Hmm.
So this client first, and this might have been actually, believe it or not, a indication that we should have done the trance ritual because at first she's feeling blocked and she's actually upset that she's not feeling anything.
Hmm.
Why am I not feeling anything? Uh, and yet she's getting sad about not feeling anything. So right, so there's the connection there. So I remember one of my classmates had shared an experience they did where they saw that a part was blocking. They created a brief parts therapy work
Uh-huh.
to dialogue with the part that was blocking.
Hmm.
And so we were able to utilize that work to ask this part to step aside to allow this experience to take place.
Hmm.
And then client was really able to fully immerse herself in this experience of um, really not being able to say goodbye to her
Hmm.
father
Hmm.
and feeling an intense amount of grief
Hmm.
and more importantly, guilt.
Yeah.
I find which also, I don't know if we'll have time for A Course in Miracles, but the concept of guilt and forgiveness is everywhere in how I see things. So
Great.
that would be another feature that always shows up.
Yeah.
Um, because she had the flu beforehand. So the guilt, she was concerned that her flu exacerbated her father's condition. Um, and, while we certainly can't know with absolute certainty, she was able to create this dialogue and express her sadness and feelings of guilt, and then, obviously speak as her father and really move to this, as we like to get to, this sort of resolution, the emotional catharsis. And eventually, she was able to, from the father role, grant herself forgiveness, and then,
Hmm.
certainly through the reparenting, grant her younger self forgiveness for not knowing, only knowing as much as they could in the moment.
Hmm.
Um, and, and then we get to do core transformation where she just gets to sit in absolute bliss of
Yeah.
um, forgiveness, letting go of this resentment, uh, and, just immersed in the feeling of it's amazing. You said this, and I don't know, I can't count how many times it always happens. It's like, I don't know how this is possible, but the word you always look for, even before the bliss,
Hmm.
starts with R, right? Relief. And
Yeah.
almost without exception,
Hmm.
how are you feeling right now? Relief. And then moving towards that feeling of, because we had done some dialogue on her spiritual perspective, so we could do um, this immersion, this sort of like kind of surrendering to the sense of oneness and
Hmm.
peace.
Beautiful.
And we only have access to work with them for 4 to 6 weeks, but we get to check up on them afterwards. But the entire time, she's in this residential program. She's, if anything, it was too successful of an intervention because it's like then she struggled to work on anything because it's like she was
Hmm.
reaching into an empty tank, and it was like, I don't know what else I feel blocked in right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we were doing mostly planning after that, like how to keep this process going,
Hmm.
finding there was at the time a practitioner, a graduate from your school that I can't remember that was located in Harrisburg that I would often let people know of because they wanted to continue the work.
Hmm.
So as far as I know, this person had reached out, continued the work, and I obviously haven't. That was 2015, but certainly 6 months, 9 months down the road, sobriety continued,
Beautiful.
feelings of peace, unity, and
Hmm.
probably deeper exploration into her authentic self.
Awesome. Isn't that the most rewarding thing? Could you imagine doing anything else? Like you took someone who is in significant grief and guilt, and I'm sure sadness was in there, and
Mhm.
through finding their feelings, through forgiveness work, through core transformation, bringing them into the core state, which is essentially when this person who was however many minutes or hours ago, or feeling all that pain is now feeling bliss and peace and then comes back to you and basically this is one of my lines, it's our job to become obsolete in the life of the client. And when she says I don't even have anything to work on anymore, it's so beautiful. I would have clients pay for package deals like 10 hours, 20 hours when they come in. It's like, all right, we got some stuff to work on. Let's commit to 10 hours. And then that's
Yeah.
resolved, let's say in 6 hours. And then I say, okay, what do you want to work on today? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, well, why are you here? Well, because I already paid for the session, but I'm good. Like, all right, well, let's keep moving it towards the positive then. If there's no more
Yeah.
pain, let's start working on life mastery and spiritual
Hmm.
awakening and all these beautiful things. We're getting towards the end of time, so I don't take too long, but you touched upon A Course in Miracles and forgiveness, and you're saying, do we have time for that? There's always time for that. So maybe, in the theme of closing words, but also because spirituality to me is the essence of the work. Yeah, any closing words, especially when it comes to spirituality, forgiveness, A Course in Miracles level facilitation.
I will say if I'm to be grandiose.
Hmm.
We're seeing this third wave of psychology, which is really the mindfulness wave. It's the DBT, it's the John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based
Hmm.
stress reduction, it's the acceptance commitment therapy. So
Hmm.
you're seeing this third wave of psychology. They're really trying to make the more kind of indescribable. They're trying to make it practical.
Hmm.
Right? They're trying to create a manual that helps you access, as you mentioned, sort of essentially what you would call concepts of spiritual awakening.
Hmm.
Um, do I? I mean, it would be so inspiring, and I don't think it's impossible. I see these TED Talks. I never see one that really inspires me on forgiveness. And forgiveness, of course, in the concept of like, there's nothing actually to forgive, to see I mean, I'll just share my favorite line. I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience and
Hmm.
decide upon the goal I would achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. Living in that mindset. Now, again, we don't want people to, because with a very kind of superficial level of understanding, that can sound like victim blaming, right? I'm blaming you, it's your fault. So you have to dig deeper and realize, like, no, if I'm the epicenter of all of this,
Hmm.
then there's nothing to ever feel victimized by. Like
Hmm.
that everything in the world is happening for me and for my growth. And if
Hmm.
we can embody that mind, there is probably a way in the future. And course kind of even has its own therapeutic manual.
Hmm.
So I just wonder and inspired by the idea that maybe that gets into the mainstream and they find a way, or I find a way, or you find a way, or someone does, where it's like it becomes a mainstream model, and then all of a sudden now it has this sort of even evidence-based mindset of just how profound that mindset and perspective can be in like the popularized version of therapy, healing, and recovery.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, you're speaking obviously my language, but you're speaking my life's mission to bring spirituality into the mainstream. And I love you talking about a third wave of psychology that is acknowledging mindfulness, but taking these lofty concepts and making them available to almost anyone. To me, A Course in Miracles has been just such a incredibly profound source of truth, something I could absolutely trust. And it's like, okay, this stuff works. So our model of where we're taking our school, I won't go into all the details now, but there's a big vision of what we're unfolding, and it would be a component of it is a research-based model of A Course in Miracles. Essentially, okay, if there's such a thing called a miracle, and not just turning water into wine or walking on water, but literally bringing someone who's in grief and guilt into peace and bliss where they don't need any more therapy, that's
Yeah.
a miracle. And to not have every practitioner in the world doing that just means, well, then what else are you doing? Like the course says, you're basically teaching fear or you're teaching love, right? You're teaching truth, you're teaching illusion. And if we're not enlightened to the truth of who we are and trained with the right techniques, then in many ways, the practitioner says, well, we're just going to sit here and talk. We'll try to figure it out together. It's kind of like the blind leading the blind. But yeah, being a philosophy religion major, starting my life or with early monasticism, like they're already enlightened beings. We don't have to figure it out, right? But we do need to create professions that can let people make a good living while guiding people, their clients, into that state. So it's so beautiful to hear you doing the work. So thank you so much, Sam. Any last short closing words before we start to wrap it up?
Gosh, no, I think that's it. It was so exciting to be here and just be able to speak about this. And I'm excited about whatever visions I liked that I'm back in the world of the Institute of. I still want to call it the Florida Institute of
Mhm.
Hypnotherapy, but still glad to be back in this world. And
Mhm.
yeah, I want to be a part of how it continues to grow in the
Yeah,
future.
good. Well, I was so pleased when your name popped back up again. I'm like, oh, cool, Sam's back. And yeah, I'm really
Yeah.
proud of this interview. And yeah, hopefully this is just the beginning of many more good things to come. So thank you so much and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.